Another surge in gas prices means more than higher heating bills. Gas is now getting too expensive for industry to use and could soon lead to shortages of food and drinks.
We've only just really opened in the last 2 months, so it's the last thing we need is something else that's going to stop us from selling our product.
Also ahead, protesters returned to the US Capitol in support of the rioters who invaded it in January. Holiday bookings soar after the government finally makes it easier to go abroad. And Notre Dame Cathedral prepares to rise from the ashes after nearly burning to the ground.
This is ITV News with Gamal Fahnbulleh.
Good evening. The Business Secretary met industry leaders today in a bid to settle nerves amid a surge in gas prices. Kwasi Kwarteng said there was no chance of Britain running out of gas and urged customers not to worry. But it's the price customers have to pay for that gas that's threatening a number of key industries, including, perhaps surprisingly, food and drink manufacturers. They rely on carbon dioxide, the production of which has been made uneconomical by the high price of gas. Our political correspondent, Harry Horton, reports.
Just months after it first opened, the pint pouring is picking up at this South London brewery. But a sharp rise in energy prices could now lead to a shortage of carbon dioxide, an essential ingredient in brewing. The threat comes after 2 huge fertilisation plants in Teesside shut down due to gas price rises. CO2 is a byproduct of fertilisation, and the supply constraints could be felt across the food and drink industry.
If it's ongoing, it'd be very bad. We've just had the COVID restrictions earlier in the year, and we've only just really opened in the last 2 months, so it's the last thing we need is something else that's going to stop us from selling our product to the trade. And with no CO2, we can't get the product ready to sell to the trade.
And it's not just beer. CO2 is used to stun animals before slaughter and in meat packaging. A slowdown in CO2 production could lead to shortages on supermarket shelves.
If you cannot get to the CO2 for humane slaughter, there's very limited options in terms of altering those plants. It would take months of reorganising to alter those plants, and you'd never get them up to the sort of capacities.
If CO2 shortages are as bad as feared, we could start to see the worst effects within weeks, and the government is trying to get ahead of that. Today, the Business Secretary met with energy suppliers to discuss the recent sharp rise in gas prices and insisted he doesn't expect to see any supply emergencies this winter.
We've already got really robust processes in place, so if retailers exit the market, there are processes in place for other retailers to pick up their customers. There are lots of different bits of regulation that the government could look at and tweak at this time. And I think really we're at a point where we're just trying to figure out where the problems are, and then if any of the existing solutions are appropriate.
Labour says the government has left the UK exposed and vulnerable to the impact of higher energy prices. Tomorrow, the Business Secretary will hold more meetings with the energy industry as the government seeks to avoid the worst effects of another energy price rise.
And Harry is with me now. There are yet more worrying effects of this high gas price tonight.
Yeah, that's right. In recent weeks, at least 4 small energy companies have ceased trading. And tonight, industry sources have told ITV News that several more small companies could go bust in the next week. Now, regulations mean that consumers won't lose any money if their company goes bust, and they'll automatically be transferred to another supplier. The Business Secretary has admitted that several energy companies are facing real pressures. I think the conversations now about whether the government needs to step in and offer more support for the energy sector.
OK, Harry, thank you. Security was tight around the US Capitol today as protesters gathered there in support of those arrested for invading the building in January. Our correspondent, Robert Moore, who so memorably covered the Capitol riots back then, was there today as well and has this report.
America first! America forever!
I pledge allegiance to the flag.
Those gathered here are seeking to challenge the very idea that January the 6th was an insurrection.
With liberty and justice for all. Amen!
Instead, they claimed that many of those arrested that day are in fact political prisoners who must be released. This was a small crowd and heavily policed. If January the 6th was an epic failure of intelligence by the FBI, there was no danger today of anyone breaching the Capitol. Some of those here are aggrieved with the Biden administration and want to make their frustration known.
Things are so messed up all around, from the southern border to Afghanistan. I believe that is so messed up right now. I don't know if we'll ever to get this country back on track because of Joe Biden.
And they call me a terrorist, and I'm a grandmother who's concerned about the way my country is going.
USA! USA! Over 600 people have been arrested for their actions on January the 6th, with almost all still awaiting trial more than 8 months on. One of those who was trampled on the Capitol steps was Philip Anderson, today insisting the media has misunderstood the motives of those there.
People weren't there because they wanted to destroy democracy. They were there because they wanted to save democracy. They did not believe the election results.
At the heart of this protest is an attempt to portray those in prison since January the 6th, not as would-be insurrectionists, but as martyrs, and not as villains, but as patriots.
Oh, say does the Star-Spangled...
But as an attempt to rewrite history, it is likely to fail. It was notable how few Trump supporters turned up, and all elected Republicans kept their distance.
Thank you for being brave enough to be here today.
Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Travel agents have reported a big spike in holiday bookings following the announcements that the COVID travel rules for England are to be simplified. From October, there'll be a simpler, shorter red list of countries requiring isolation. And fully vaccinated people will no longer need a costly PCR test before or after they return. Martha Fairley reports.
Coming back to England from a trip abroad is about to become a whole lot easier. Although the changes to travel rules won't happen in time for passengers jetting off to Greece and Spain from Gatwick Airport today.
So do you think once these new rules come in, you might be encouraged to travel a bit more then?
Yes, we probably will do. I'd like to go away for Christmas.
It's a bit annoying that obviously we had to do the test and everything this time, and then it's just got changed for next month, but it'll be fine.
Yeah, we'd like to get away more. I think everyone would.
The last 2 years have been particularly turbulent for the travel sector, but they're hoping that this simplification of international travel rules will give consumers the confidence to start booking again. Several leading travel firms have reported a surge in foreign holiday bookings, up around 200% since the changes were announced.
We've been really busy today, this morning. We've had lots of calls from our customers. Customers are more confident that there's fewer restrictions. And the test, they were worried that they would get stuck in the country, is obviously going from October, so that's great news.
And are you both double vaccinated?
Yes.
Perfect.
Many, like Douglas, making a last-minute decision to get away for the October half-term.
We've been looking at it, but with all the relaxations that just come off, we went, yep, we're off down to the agents and we're booked up to go to Rhodes.
But the travel industry says it still needs some help to get through the year.
This move is incredibly welcome, it really is, but it is rather late in the day. We're at the end of the summer. So it is welcome, but it's not in itself enough. We do need some financial assistance as well.
They're hoping the simplified travel system will tempt holidaymakers back to the beaches in search of some much-needed sunshine. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
A French minister has accused Britain of being in the lap of the Americans in the latest escalation of a row over where Australia will buy billions of pounds worth of submarines. Australia had contracted to buy the subs from France, but suddenly switched the order to America this week as part of a defence pact that includes the UK. French Minister Clément Beaune today said global Britain really means a return into the American lap. The US says it plans to fly some 10,000 migrants trying to enter illegally from Mexico back to Haiti, where most are from. Thousands have been camped under a bridge that connects Mexico to Texas. And despite promising a greater respect for women's rights, Afghanistan's Taliban rulers today changed the Women's Affairs Ministry in Kabul into a Ministry of Morality. Secondary schools also opened today to boys only. not to girls. In sports, Derby County fans had little to celebrate today as their team notched up a victory over Midlands rivals Stoke. But the big picture still looks very gloomy following Derby's descent into administration and probably relegation from the Championship. Chris Scudder went to see what the fans made of it all.
They were champions of England when old Big Ed Brian Clough was in charge at Derby County. But now they're dancing to a different tune, the Lone Pipers' Lament. One of England's most famous clubs is entering administration, and with that will come a 12-point deduction and likely relegation to the third tier, if not a threat to its very existence.
Mismanagement, it's got to be mismanagement on the boards and the ownership of the club.
I can see the club folding. What do you think Cloughy would have made of it all?
It had told them some own truth, I think.
Yeah. Owner Mel Morris's parking space was empty for the match against Stoke, and maybe just as well. In a statement, Derby said that because the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on the revenues and profits of all of its businesses, the club has been unable to service its day-to-day financial obligations. But in a year where Derby have already been fined for breaking spending rules and will almost certainly face a further points deduction, the pandemic is not the sole cause of its problems.
You know, blaming COVID, there's however many of the teams in the EFL, how many of them else, how many others have got into administration, none as of yet.
On a bittersweet day, Derby's 2-1 win over Stoke was a temporary reprieve. Their points tally could soon be in the minus.
Don't give up, let's hope yet.
Chris Scudder, ITV News, Derby.
And finally, hearts were broken across France and beyond when Paris's great Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire almost 2.5 years ago. It was gutted, lost its roof and spire, and probably came within minutes of complete collapse. It may surprise you to learn that the years since were not spent rebuilding it, only stabilising the structure. But today, it was announced that those works are finally complete. The church is now filled with a lattice of scaffolding and braces, ready for reconstruction by skilled artisans to begin. The goal is for it to reopen to visitors by the time Paris hosts the Olympics in 2024. And that's it. The weather forecast is next. But from all of us here on the Weekend News Team, many thanks indeed for watching. Bye-bye.